Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Multi-Cloud Networking, Connecting and Securing the Future. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be moderating today's event. Our featured speakers are Shamus McGillicuddy, VP of Research covering Network Management at EMA, and Bob Gates, Senior Analyst covering Network Management at EMA. Shamus has more than 16 years of experience in the IT industry as an industry analyst and journalist. His research focuses on all aspects of managing enterprise networks. Bob has over 20 years of experience in writing for general audiences, B2B audiences, and tech target, along with performing account-based marketing research for many prominent vendors in the network management field. And before I hand things off to today's featured speakers, I wanted the audience to know that you can log your questions anytime using the Q&A functionality. Shamus and Bob will be dedicating the last 10 minutes or so to taking questions. Also, today's event is being recorded and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include resources from today's event, including the on-demand playback. So I hope you'll check that email out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our first featured speaker, Shamus McGillicuddy. Shamus.
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So this is independent research into multi-cloud networking strategies in the enterprise world. Of course, to make it financially possible to do that independent research, we look for sponsors of the project. And so I want to acknowledge and thank the companies that sponsored this particular research on multi-cloud networking. Their logos are here on this slide. You've got Aviatrix, IBM, some people have heard of them, Juniper Networks, Live Action, and Nepheli Networks. So all these companies have some sort of interest and provide some sort of solutions in the world of multi-cloud networking, whether it be infrastructure or observability capabilities. So thank you to those 5 companies. Briefly, today's agenda, we'll talk a little bit about why we did this research and how, research goals and methodology. We'll talk about how multi-cloud networks are on the rise throughout the enterprise world, why that might be, why it sets up the need for a multi-cloud networking strategy. Then we will look at how the native networking solutions that are provided by individual cloud providers, which have dominated cloud networking for years, remain dominant today, even in a multi-cloud world, and why that might be a problem in some circumstances. Then we'll talk about end-to-end multi-cloud solutions and how they are possibly the future for enterprises as they dive deeper and deeper into multi-cloud. And then rounding out the final bend here, coming around the bend, we'll talk about multi-cloud network observability. You know, that's a major issue even in single clouds, but multi-cloud it gets even harder. Just being able to see what's happening in your network, being able to support digital services around performance and being able to troubleshoot issues. The NetOps teams are often struggling there. And we'll close out with some final thoughts and open it up to Q&A, as Raleigh mentioned. So, research goals. Let's identify how to build a better multi-cloud network. That's sort of what we were thinking as we got into this. We found in this research particularly that only 35% of multi-cloud networks are fully successful. So, it's a question we asked in this project when we were surveying people. We surveyed people who evaluate, procure, and implement multi-cloud networking solutions, and they were more confident about success. But then we also surveyed in this research people who operate those multi-cloud networks. They're monitoring, troubleshooting, managing change, and they were less confident. So, we went into this research asking ourselves, like, what are they doing wrong? What should they be doing differently? We wanted to know, these people are obviously thinking about how to put together a network architecture across their multiple cloud providers, and most of them are not feeling very confident about it. But we wanted to see if we could identify any possible best practices, any possible pain points that people should watch out for, and what kinds of technology strategies they might want to adopt as they move forward. It was based on a survey of 351 IT pros involved in multi-cloud networking. As I mentioned previously, they told us they were either implementing solutions, managing solutions. Some of them were also providing executive leadership to groups that are responsible for the aforementioned implementation and management. This side sort of shows you who they were. There's a lot of network engineers, some CIO, CTO types, and some middle management types, and network architects were also pretty prominent. Network engineering group was the most dominant, but they also had a lot of people in the CIO suite and cloud groups and security groups. That was intentional. I wanted to get a little bit of security people in there. And cloud people, just to give different perspectives. Mostly mid-market to very large companies, and with lots of revenue ranging from 50 million to more than 5 billion, and in terms of like total employee size, anywhere from 500 people to 10,000 or more. More than a dozen industries represented, and you see the ones that are most common here. It was also a transatlantic survey, mostly North America, including the United States and Canada, but also Europe was well represented across the UK, UK, France, and Germany, the bigger Western Europe and Central Europe economies. In addition to the survey, we also did some one-on-one interviews with people just to get some color. The report has a lot of quotes from them. We'll quote them a little bit in this presentation as well. So let's talk about the rise of multi-cloud networks. It's the new status quo, first of all. Multi-cloud is becoming somewhat ubiquitous. This data on the left is from some research we did in April of last year. We said, how many infrastructure as a service cloud providers are you using today? And 72% of people, these are NetOps, mostly NetOps people, network infrastructure, network engineering types, 72% said that their enterprises had multiple cloud providers already. And they told us that by 2024, end of 2024, 88% of them will be multi-cloud. So that's pretty ubiquitous. Now, this survey of 351 people, for this research in particular, we only surveyed people who told us they had at least 2 cloud providers. So everyone in this particular survey is multi-cloud versus the data on the left, which is from a previous research project. The data on the right is from this research, and we asked them, why are you multi-cloud? What would make you add that complexity? Performance optimization was the top driver. Having applications closer to users, having applications in more places so they can serve, global operations. High availability application architecture was a secondary driver. That, being able to have like an application that can fail over in real time, also have applications that are replicated across different regions. So no matter where you're accessing it from, it's the same service. Cost reduction and optimization and workload requirements that drive specific cloud provider adoption. Like, for instance, you're looking for a cloud provider that's really good at supporting AI workloads, or maybe you're looking for a certain provider that's really good at giving you, certain networking functions, perhaps, that can support your workload needs. So that's another secondary driver, and workload mobility, being able to move workloads wherever you need. That could drive you to another provider for, certain instances. And bring up the rear of the top 6 here with data sovereignty. So that's another pretty prominent driver, but not as common as the rest on this list, obviously. Now, multi-cloud puts networking in the spotlight. We asked people in the survey, has networking become more or less important to your cloud strategy over the last 2 years? And well over 80% said it's at least become somewhat more important. 35% said significant, more important. And only 3% claim that networking become less important to their cloud strategies in recent years. So obviously, as these enterprises start adding more complexity with more providers, adopting hybrid cloud, and things like that, they really need to start thinking about how the network can better serve the cloud strategy. But there are lots of challenges. First, we asked them, what are the network management processes that you're most struggling with in your multi-cloud environment. So on the left-hand side, you see most broken tasks. Those are the network management processes they're struggling with. Security monitoring and incident response. So that's not necessarily a NetOps thing, but it's top of mind for NetOps and network engineering types. We also see cost management is a big one, and performance monitoring and troubleshooting. So those are the big three issues. Then security policy management and network design are the secondary ones. Organizations that told us that they were struggling the most with their overall cloud strategy, a multi-cloud networking strategy, the ones that are really, sort of the worst in class, if you will, they were more likely to call out performance monitoring and troubleshooting as particularly difficult. So that's like a make or break issue potentially. We also found that people who told us they're in a network engineering team or a cloud operations team were more worried about the difficulty they're having with performance monitoring and troubleshooting, whereas people in like a CIO suite were not as concerned about that. So observability is clearly an issue where there's a bit of a gap between best in class and worst in class, but also a gap in understanding between the CIO's office and the people that are really in the trenches. Business pain points. We asked them, what are the business issues that are causing you the most pain in your multi-cloud network? And security risk was by far the biggest thing. Kind of calls to mind the fact that they're struggling with security monitoring and incident response and security policy management. So the security risk is like a big issue for the cloud networking team. But they're also talking about conflicts and collaboration issues between groups. So the cloud team might think that the network team has no business being involved in the cloud. Why are you here? Like, stick to the data center and the on-prem network. We'll take care of the cloud. And that can cause pain when the network team's like trying to build out a multi-cloud networking strategy. Then budget is an issue, and undefined processes are also issues. The network engineering team and the cloud ops team were both more likely to be worried about that fourth one, the undefined processes. We don't have processes defined for how to do this. How the network team and the cloud team can put together best practices for how a network should be built. The CIO suite was less concerned about that, which I think is another big awareness gap, obviously. And then technical pain points on the right. Network vendor sprawl. Most of the companies in this survey are using more than one vendor for cloud networking in their multi-cloud environment. So they're seeing some complexity from that sprawl, and that's a concern to them. More of an issue for the IT execs, like the CIOs, the CTOs, the VPs of infrastructure. Those are the ones that are most worried about vendor sprawl. Whereas if you talk to the engineers, the architects, the people that are hands-on with technology, they're less concerned about that vendor sprawl, which points to a possible bias towards best-in-class technology as opposed to having an end-to-end strategy. Like, oh yeah, we can make it work with the individual tools and different cloud providers. We don't need to consolidate. That could be an issue strategically in the future. And then performance issues, product maturity were big secondary ones, and inconsistent support across cloud providers. So performance issues, they might be running into things where they're using like the native VPN from a cloud provider, and it's got limits around bandwidth, or maybe they're just the network they've built across their multi-cloud environment is not architected in a way where applications are going to perform well, and they need to rethink that. Product maturity, you might be using like a new piece of software for cloud networking, and it's got some bugs and instability issues. And then inconsistent support across cloud providers. They're thinking to themselves, well, I'm using this cloud networking solution in AWS and Azure. It's time for me to look at Google, maybe Oracle and IBM. And is this third-party solution capable of supporting everything I need in those new cloud environments? So that's something that they run into. I'm going to turn it over to Bob now, who's going to cover this section, and then I'll be back in a few minutes.
Great, thanks, Shamus. Let's see here. Looking at the most recent research, one of the biggest takeaways that we got out of it, and an area I want to focus on here, is that the networking solutions provided by the cloud providers for IaaS platforms are the #1 way that multi-cloud networks are managed today. So let's look at the next slide, and we'll see that 55.8% of network teams say that the networking features natively offered by cloud providers is the most important part of their multi-cloud network strategy. Well, guess what? A lot of them are struggling to figure out a way to make it work. And even though 55.8% say that they're using it, the satisfaction really isn't that high. But it's important to remember that data center networking, so that traditional role that Shamus just discussed of the networking team before cloud, as well as the multi-cloud solutions that CSP provide, are also more than 50% of the respondents said it's affecting their strategy. So let's look a little bit more at some of the trouble spots. So on the next slide, we'll see that one of the EMA takeaways from this latest research is that enterprises cannot build a multi-cloud network using just proprietary cloud solution providers. As you can see, just 24% of the 351 respondents in our latest research found that they're fully satisfied. So that means that there's room for improvement with 3 out of 4 of our respondents. And essentially what they found is that good enough that they've relied on with the native tools might not be enough as they continue to expand their use of the cloud. Another way we take a look at the data, and Shamus had mentioned this already, but we sometimes like to run crosstabs across the different titles and teams. And in this particular case, the IT pros that were closest to the technology, sort of fingers in the mud and in the trenches, or whatever other term you want, were the ones who expressed the greatest level of concern about their multi-cloud networking environment. So it's an important difference that really shows that the folks who arguably know the most are the most concerned. And if we look at the right side, you'll see that some of the specific areas of concern lead with bandwidth here. And as Shamus mentioned already, in separate research, we found that 72% of companies are multi-cloud today, or were a few months ago. Within the next 2 years, that will grow to 88%. And that doesn't account for the growth of existing multi-cloud companies who may be adding additional clouds. So as the bandwidth grows, and as the cloud footprint grows, the bandwidth demand will grow, and that will continue to be a pain point. Of course, cost, cloud provider lock-in, limited network security solutions, and skills gap, and the lack of advanced networking features are other areas that received significant mention within our latest survey in terms of the challenges specific to the native tools from the cloud providers. And in summary, again, another look at some of the crosstab analysis, looking at sort of the worst in class, as Shamus dubbed it. We found that the least successful companies are most likely to struggle with cost, skills gap, and the fragmented management. Those are the 3 there on that list on the right, where our worst in class respondents are struggling the most. So anyways, that's all from here, and back to you, Shamus, for the rest of the presentation.
All right, thanks, Bob. So as Bob mentioned, like, satisfaction with using proprietary networking features and functions offered by the individual cloud providers is pretty soft, and people are recognizing those issues that he highlighted around bandwidth and skills gaps and complexity, vendor lock-in, all that stuff. So we think at EMA that adopting an end-to-end multi-cloud solution for networking is basically inevitable. It's the future. When we presented that question to people in the survey, would you be interested in adopting an end-to-end multi-cloud networking solution? 93% said, yeah, absolutely. Successful people who are feeling the best about their overall strategy around multi-cloud networking were the most open to it. They were the most likely to say yes. 15% of the people in the survey said they'd already put something like that into production. And we also saw that as people told, the number of cloud providers they're actually using went up, the more aggressive their timeline with adopting some sort of end-to-end solution was. So, for instance, people in the survey who had just two cloud providers, two infrastructure as a service providers in production, were slower to be or less likely to be at the production phase with such a solution. Whereas people who had 4 or 5 or 6 or more infrastructure as a service providers, which were not too uncommon in the survey, were the most likely to say they've already got something in production because they had to have that in place. So, there are a lot of different ways you can get to having an end-to-end multi-cloud networking solution. And we're not going to claim to know exactly what vendor you should be working with. I mean, some of them sponsored this research, so you probably want to take a look at them. But we did ask them, like, what are your requirements? And so one of the things we checked on was, what are your critical functionality requirements for an end-to-end multi-cloud networking solution? And as you can see here, security is critical. They want an integrated network security overlay or foundation for multi-cloud networking. So they want to turn to that multi-cloud networking solution to implement things like firewalling and intrusion detection prevention, maybe DDoS detection prevention, things like that. Maybe even segmentations, like micro-segmentation schemes, perhaps in some cases. They think that this is the way to get like an end-to-end security architecture in place across their multiple cloud providers. And then secondary priorities, VPN for secure ingress or egress, transit routing, a network address translation, really specific functionality here. And then tertiary priorities were load balancing, and then subnets and VLAN functionality, which is not a huge priority when you look at the other things on this list, but clearly 1 in 5 are thinking to themselves, I don't want to rely on my infrastructure as a service provider for individual segmentation of the networks inside my VPCs and VNets. I really want to be able to have like an end-to-end approach to how I segment my networks in my cloud environments. We also asked them about general platform and requirements and like things you want from your vendor that you work with for an end-to-end cloud solution. And high availability and resiliency was number 1. Like, these things can't fail, they can't go down. That makes a lot of sense, especially if it's like a SaaS-based solution, or if it's pure software. You want to make sure that it has an architecture in place where you can fail over if like your primary virtual appliance in the cloud goes down or something. And then scalability and integration with third-party systems are very important. And then tertiary priorities are ease of use, cost, automation capabilities, and monitoring and observability. The organizations that told us that they were the most successful with their multi-cloud networking so far, they were more likely to prioritize monitoring and observability support and integration with third parties. So those are potential best-in-class, best practice focuses when you're thinking about how to select a solution. And then the least successful people told us that they are really focused on cost, ease of use, and scalability, which is a bit of a surprise. The cost is not a surprise. I always find that when people tell me that cost is one of the first things they think about when selecting a solution, they're always more likely to be doing badly because they're just going with something. They're going something cheap instead of going for something that's good. Maybe they get lucky and it's both cheap and good. But if that's one of the first things that you put on your list of what I need from a solution, you're kind of asking for trouble. Speaking of integrations, we also asked them about how important are open APIs on your end-to-end network solution for the multi-cloud world, and 82% said it was at least somewhat important to have that. So most of everyone is looking for that. That's not a surprise. Successful organizations were the most likely to make it a priority and tell us that it's not somewhat important, it's critical. And then what are they doing with those APIs? Well, IT service management integration is their top priority. So they want to get everything integrated with ServiceNow or something else to make sure that ticketing's automated, and moves, adds, and changes through a ticketing system is automated. And maybe that extends into their CMDB as well, if they're ambitious. And they also want integration between cloud network vendors. So even if they get an end-to-end multi-cloud networking solution, they're still likely to tell us that they're a multi-vendor environment out there. That there's, so for instance, they're like, okay, yeah, I got this end-to-end networking solution across my multiple clouds, but I do want it to integrate with certain networking functions offered by my individual cloud providers that I don't want to change, possibly because my cloud ops team says I can't change it. Like, we don't want to stop using the load balancing features from our cloud provider. They're baked into our processes. We can't just rip and replace them. And because you've got this fancy, shiny new networking vendor, or that fancy, shiny new networking vendor doesn't actually offer load balancing, they're offering everything else like routing and security and stuff, but they need to integrate into load balancing capabilities for orchestration purposes, possibly. And then finally, telemetry collection. They want to make sure that they can use APIs to tap those networking solutions to pull data from them and bring it into their third-party monitoring tools, which I'll touch on in a second. And that was a best practice focus there. The people who told us that they're particularly successful with multi-cloud networking strategy were more likely to say that that was a priority for their API use. All right, so we talked about end-to-end networking in a multi-cloud world. Let's talk about observability in that multi-cloud networking world. This is nothing new, but we wanted to check in to see how these people are feeling today. I've been asking this question in various research projects over the last few years. How satisfied are you with your current network management tool set's ability to monitor and troubleshoot your multi-cloud networks? Usually I ask this question, how satisfied are you with your ability to monitor cloud networks? But here it's specifically multi-cloud networks. You see 24% said we're fully satisfied. 52% almost said somewhat satisfied. And that's a really important thing to look at. That's what we look at in our research a lot, because you rarely see a lot of people willing to give themselves an F when they're taking a survey about what they do all day. You know, it's a 20-minute survey. We ask them 30, 40 questions about their core mission in life. And then at the end of the survey, we say, how are you doing with all this? And when you get to that point, psychologically speaking, these people are not going to give themselves an F most of the time. In this case, you see a lot of them did. I mean, a little over 1% said they're very dissatisfied with their tools, and 8.5% said they're somewhat dissatisfied. But that 52% are like, well, you know, these are the tools that I've implemented and I use and rely on for operations, and they're not doing exactly what I need them to do. But I'm not going to say that they're a total failure, because it's really kind of an existential thing for me. So yes, 52% say we have room for improvement with how these tools are providing us with visibility, and 24% are willing to tell us we got nothing to worry about. We can see everything. Now you ask yourself on this webinar, like, when you try to monitor, that was a glitch. When you try to monitor what's happening across your clouds from a network observability or network monitoring perspective, can you say that you see everything you want? Probably. If you are, please raise your hand if you can see everything you want. I'd love to hear from you, because I want to know what you're using. We saw a little CIO gap here. The CIO suite was the more likely to say they're satisfied overall with observability across multi-cloud networks, whereas the network engineering teams, which are most likely to be using these tools to solve problems, they are the least satisfied. So no surprise there. They're the ones working closely with the tools. They're the ones that are least happy. And here's a senior network engineer that we interviewed, works for a large university hospital system and medical school in North America, told us, compared with on-prem, where we have visibility into everything, In the cloud, it's all opaque. I don't know if something is wrong, and we don't get alerts if a region is having a problem. He can't manage capacity because he doesn't even know when he doesn't have visibility into like when usage of the cloud is going to ramp up. And his primary involvement in cloud networks was like managing direct connections from data center into the cloud so that his network had enough bandwidth connect in there and into the cloud from the corporate network. And he was doing that for multiple cloud providers. And he just said that like he can't really manage the capacity well because he doesn't have visibility into what's happening. So ongoing issue for lots and lots of people. Paths to network observability. What are people using? Very general categories here. We didn't like ask them to tell us what vendors they're using or anything like that, but we asked them, could you describe and characterize the tools that you use for monitoring, troubleshooting your multi-cloud networks? And you see most of them actually told us they had to acquire new tools to get that visibility. Of course, the numbers in this chart don't add up to 100 because it was a multiple choice question because we knew that they would be using more than one tool. But yeah, nearly 68% say we had to get new tools. Close to 44% said we adapted our existing tools that we use to monitor and troubleshoot our on-prem networks. And nearly 37% told us that they're leveraging monitoring capabilities that are native to their cloud network infrastructure solutions. So, a lot of cloud networking vendors offer integrated observability and assurance and monitoring capabilities. And so more than a third, close to, approaching 40%, said that was something they were using. In terms of adapting those incumbent tools, it was favored by the most successful organizations. It was also more popular as organizations add new cloud providers. So the higher number of cloud providers in production, the more likely you were to adapt your incumbent monitoring tools. We also asked them generally, like, what are you trying to monitor? So you see cloud to data center connectivity was the highest priority that they wanted to be able to monitor, but they're also very interested in cloud to cloud connectivity. So those are the two big ones. So that tells you that they're really trying to build out a true multi-cloud network architecture where not only are they connecting their on-prem network into the cloud through their data center, but they're also connecting those clouds together, and also site to cloud. So being able to monitor how corporate sites and end users are experiencing that connectivity from those corporate sites into the cloud. So, branch to cloud connectivity is another big priority, secondary priority, basically. So just some final thoughts. Multi-cloud is ubiquitous, and the native networking solutions offered by individual cloud providers is generally not up to the task of supporting a multi-cloud network. So we see end-to-end networking solutions as the future, and we definitely reviewed a lot of the features that you might want to look for in such a solution here and capabilities. But you also can't ignore observability when you are trying to get that multi-cloud network up and running, because visibility is a must. The NetOps team needs to be able to monitor and troubleshoot the multi-cloud network as well, or almost as well, if not better, than they were able to do so in the on-prem network. So those are the key findings that we went over here, but we also encourage you to check out the full report for more insights and everything we covered today. We dive deeper into a lot of things like, what to look for and what people are looking for in a multi-cloud and networking solution, but also we asked them about, what are you doing with skills gaps in cloud networking? Because a lot of them told us they're struggling to hire there. And most of them said that they're trying to devote some resources to training up their existing staff to be able to work in the cloud, on the cloud networking. Also, the issue of influence. How does the network team get a seat at the table? Most of them told us they're kind of struggling with that. So we wanted to look at how they can improve that to some extent, and who their key partners are, which partners are going to empower them. One of them would be cybersecurity, for instance. But there are others. We took a deep dive into cloud networking security strategies a bit, like what are you doing around network security specifically in your multi-cloud networking? So we asked some questions there. We also asked them how they feel about their ability to impose like consistent security policies across multiple cloud providers and why they might be struggling with that. And then finally, we looked a lot more at the management layer, like what kind of network management challenges you're dealing with in the multi-cloud network. We touched on that a little bit here at the beginning, and also automation, like what are you doing around automation of your multi-cloud networks? I think automation was a tertiary priority in the end-to-end multi-cloud networking solutions in terms of functionality, but it's also, something that they turn to third-party solutions like offered by individual cloud providers or infrastructure as code providers or network automation vendors. So we asked them about what they're doing there as well. So there's a lot of data, a lot of insight, a lot of quotes from practitioners in this research, and I encourage you to check it out if you can. So thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Raleigh for questions.
Great. Thank you, Shamus. And if you can just advance to the last slide.
Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, no worries. I wanted to let everyone know that the full report is available. You can also check out the sponsors' websites. I suspect most, if not all of them, also have the report on their site. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the questions. Shamus and Bob, I'm not sure who's going to take the question, so I'm going to ask them and feel free to chime in. The first one is, what kinds of vendors are offering end-to-end multi-cloud networking solutions?
There's a variety. You can see a couple here, Aviatrix and Nefelli offer specific solutions there. But they're also Juniper would probably be able to support your needs from a variety of perspectives. One I'm thinking is SD-WAN. This research found a lot of people look to SD-WAN vendors as potential multi-cloud networking solutions. So that's another route to take. We've seen like some of the data center networking vendors extend their software fabrics or software overlays into the cloud from the data center, which is another option. All of them will have like different capabilities and different strengths, and it's really about you trying to figure out what your key requirements are, and then trying to match that up with the different types of vendors that are out there. But there's a lot of different directions you can take. A lot of the people in this survey were also using like managed services from service providers, like network service providers and stuff like that. So that's another route to take as well.
Thanks, Shamus. And what groups should own networking in a multi-cloud company?
Well, we look at our research from the perspective of the network engineering and operations teams, network infrastructure teams. And so I'm always biased in favor of them having control. It's not always the case. In fact, a lot of them tell us that they're just either by choice or by leadership decisions. They just, every time services migrated from the data center to the cloud, is just stripped from their responsibility from a networking perspective, and everything in the cloud belonged to someone else. So I think that the network team and the information security, IT security, cybersecurity team should be co-owners as much as possible of cloud networking, and should be acting as expert consulting groups to whoever is leading in the cloud, DevOps, app dev, line of business, whoever it is. The networking team and the security team should join forces and provide guidance and or ownership around everything that has to do with networking and network security and cybersecurity in the cloud. So there you go.
Thanks, Shamus. Could SD-WAN be a good solution for multi-cloud environments to solve main networks issues and concerns?
Yes. Oh yeah, that one just came in while I was talking. Yes. SD-WAN could be a good solution depending on which SD-WAN vendor you're talking about. There's a lot of SD-WAN vendors out there, and some of them have made efforts around providing sort of like a capability around putting overlays and in place and routing and on-ramps or whatever. Depending on which vendor you're talking to, you'll have different nomenclature. But yeah, I've seen SD-WAN vendors that have tried to address the issue of multi-cloud networking directly. I mean, they're mostly known for being, site to cloud or site to site connectivity, but multi-cloud networking is potentially something they could do. And also, as many SD-WAN vendors aggressively evolve towards being a secure access service edge vendor, where they're doing a lot of cloud delivered security, they're actually probably providing a lot of like direct. They're going to have a lot of points of presence, which enable them to be closer to the cloud and the cloud providers in terms of like interconnects. That's a whole other can of worms, but yeah, they're depending on which one you're looking at and which one you're talking to, they might have a pretty good solution in place.
Thank you for those insights. Let's take one final question. It is, what kind of tools are people actually using to get good visibility into multi-cloud networks?
Yeah. So it's going to vary from company to company. A lot of them just have different philosophies about what kind of visibility they need, and that dictates what kinds of tools they use. But I'm finding a lot of them are looking for like active monitoring solutions, something that sends like synthetic traffic out into the cloud from remote sites to give them a sense of end user experience and application performance from the end user perspective. But a lot of them are also trying to collect, many of them want telemetry like collected directly from in the cloud, whether that's like some sort of device metrics or maybe even capturing like actual traffic, because you're finding like a lot of cloud providers now offering the opportunity for you to mirror actual network traffic in the cloud to a tool like a packet monitoring tool or something like that, so that you can actually look at the packets crossing through your virtual network in the cloud, and that can give you like granular visibility into performance, but also some of them, more importantly, security, like what's happening, from a threat perspective, is there any malicious activity, things like that. So you increasingly are going to see like packet level visibility that gives you like the ability to do passive monitoring in the cloud, and then being able to use like a traditional like SNMP based monitoring tool that pulls devices. Most of them have been doing a decent job of collecting metrics from the cloud for a while, so that's another one. But it's still, so there's still a lot of vendors that are maturing their capabilities around that, and that's probably why a lot of people are still a little dissatisfied. And so you want to watch for observability vendors literally talking up what they're doing in the cloud, especially like multi-cloud, to see like who's gonna be able to give you that comprehensive observability.
Good insights. Thank you. And we did get another question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask this one as well. Public cloud has limited observability as the run at layer 3 and above. What are some best practices for improving observability over network connections?
I mean, I think I kind of touched on it just now. Like, if you've got the budget to monitor packet traffic, packet data, you can mirror that traffic out of your cloud to a tool. Maybe you might want to work with a third-party vendor that's really good at converting that packet data into metadata, which would be less expensive to store and analyze. You can also, like I say, use active monitoring tools, which aren't going to show you like actual production traffic, but it will give you sort of a sense of reachability and potential, errors as you're trying to get a sense of what's happening in your cloud. In terms of best practices in the context of this research, we didn't really dig into that at a granular level, but there was a lot of interest in things like, trying to use observability solutions that collect metrics and logs and traces, which is the traditional like DevOps oriented observability, but also efforts to get flow data if possible, that packet data I was talking about. Also, VPC flow logs have become really important on the net in the NetOps world, although I hear a lot of difference of opinion about how suitable they are for network observability. There's a lot of, some people find it difficult to analyze that data, and it's not particularly analogous to like flow data that people are used to collecting from their switching and routing solutions. So but yeah, there are a lot of options. The report touches on it a little bit more than what we're able to present in this PowerPoint, yeah, that'll be an area of future research and ongoing research as well. So hopefully we'll be able to answer that question in more depth in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Shamus. And I wanted to thank you and Bob for your insights today. And I wanted to thank the audience for taking time out of your schedule to join us for today's event. Please be on the lookout for the email from Enterprise Management Associates about today's event. And I hope we'll see you at a future research webinar. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.